Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. If you're listening in real time, it is right before Halloween 2023. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and this podcast is being recorded on the traditional territory of the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Mississauga people. And I'm continuing to learn, and I'm really excited to learn more about the culture of the Anishinaabe people, while also learning more about my settler ancestors who came here to Turtle Island generations ago. If you are new here and wondering who I am, I'm a Canadian yoga teacher, mom of 3, entrepreneur, and someone who's really excited to ask a lot of questions and learn. That is why I feel like podcasting is a really great fit, because I get to meet some amazing people, connect with them, yoga teachers, entrepreneurs, other people from around the world each and every week, and ask a lot of questions and then share it with you, which is really the fun part, especially on episodes like today's episode. And before we dive right in, I want to say a huge thank you to OfferingTree. I use and love their software in my own business because it automates everything, from my bookings to my payments, my Zoom links, reminders, and so much more. And we have a special podcast listener discount code for you over at OfferingTree.com/Shannon. Also, today's episode is brought to you by Pelvic Health Professionals. This is the other hat that I wear. This is a place where movement educators and healthcare professionals collaborate and learn the most up-to-date information regarding pelvic health. Visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com to check that out and to join us if it feels like a good fit. Now, I want to give you a little backstory about today's episode. It's a great example of how I sometimes will see something online that gets me really upset at certain aspects of the health and wellness industry. And so before this episode, and a few other episodes that we put together, I saw this Facebook post by someone who talked a lot about Ayurveda. And I think this person is also a yoga teacher. I had been following them a long time ago and I hadn't really seen their posts for a while. And then all of a sudden, I saw this post where they were telling people what kind of milk they can and cannot drink. And it was so upsetting for me because I've seen how much harm can be caused when people are talking about diets and food choices and bodies, especially when they are not qualified to do so. So I think someone who's qualified to talk to you about your food is someone who's a registered dietitian, who's educated in eating disorders, and someone who you feel like you have a really great connection with. So what did I do when I read this post? I'm kind of cringing here. I commented on it. And I'm cringing because I don't think it was the best decision. I don't think it was the best use of my time and energy. I kind of thought, well, why don't I pop in here real quick, share a comment, and leave a podcast episode that we've done in the past that talks about scope of practice and talking about, diet and eating and really educating the people who might be reading that post. And the reason why I'm cringing is because it didn't go over well. This person has built their audience. Their audience is used to them giving out nutritional advice without any training. And they don't really take well to someone speaking up in the comments. Anyway, at the end of the day, I learned, and I'm also grateful that I saw that post. To be clear, I'm not at all grateful or happy that that kind of a post is still happening in the health and wellness space. It's really a prime example of the importance of scope of practice. And I still get pretty fired up just thinking about that post now. But I took that energy after I commented. I took that energy and I used it to create some more podcasts meant to educate all of us. So I decided, okay, I'm going to dive in and learn a little bit more and ask more questions and see how I can bring those questions to all of you so we can learn together. And I also want to share as well, in case you haven't heard me talk about this in previous episodes, that I used to say things about food that I don't say anymore before I knew what I know now. I had a very close friend almost die from an eating disorder, and that prompted me to learn a lot about this in a hurry because it's a very life-threatening illness It's a mental health illness that isn't talked about enough. And I am so grateful that there are some amazing people like Abbey Morris that are talking about this more. Abbey Morris is a yoga teacher, a mindfulness and meditation instructor, a sound healer, and an Ayurvedic yoga specialist who works with folks who are on the journey to recovery from eating disorders and disordered eating. Abbey shares her very vulnerable story in today's episode. She talks about how yoga helped her along her recovery path and how she now shares yoga. And what I think is so cool is she even shares a class that has nothing to do with asana, because that's what people were requesting. So this is really a case of where all of the limbs of yoga, all of the parts of yoga are being used to help people who are in recovery or who are dealing with eating disorders or disordered eating. I'm really excited for you to meet Abbey in a moment. And I also want to say, if you have not listened to our other podcasts that are focused on the information that we as yoga teachers really need to know about eating disorders, I'm going to put those in the show notes. You don't have to go back and listen to those first, but I highly recommend that you do listen to them because there's a lot of misinformation and myths, and just society has said a lot of things to us that isn't true about our bodies and how we fuel them. And I also want to say, in case you are gathering with family or friends in the next couple of months, maybe there's Thanksgiving or Christmas or some other kind of celebration going on in your life. At any point, if you are getting together with people and you are eating together, make a little mental note of how often people are commenting on body size or body shape, and also how often people are commenting on what people are eating or the amount people are eating. And together, let's become really mindful to take that out of our conversations. And if you're wondering why, make sure you go listen to the podcasts in the show notes that go more in depth with this conversation. Let's dive in and meet Abbey and hear her story. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Abbey. It's so great to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here and talking to you. So thank you.
Tell our listeners, what is the work that you do and who do you do it for?
So I'm in St. Catharines, Ontario. So I am just between Niagara Falls and Toronto area for anyone who's listening and not so sure where that is. And in my town, I have a small yoga studio that I opened just this past April. The studio is called Yoga by Abbey. And I have been teaching under Yoga by Abbey for a few years now, and especially throughout the pandemic, which looked kind of interesting, doing a lot of online offerings, renting different spaces, doing a lot of outdoor offerings when that was appropriate. So it's been a wild ride, but in April, I was able to find a nice little space in my town close to the downtown area. And there I now offer a weekly public schedule with some pretty unique offerings. Myself, I am a 500-hour registered yoga teacher. I'm an Ayurvedic yoga specialist. And I also play the crystal sound bowls. So I am a certified sound healer as well. I am still in the process of acquiring my Ayurvedic health counseling certification right now with Halle Pule. And at my studio, aside from the weekly public schedule, I also work one-to-one with clients on various different goals through the practice of yoga and Ayurvedic yoga practices under my scope of practice, of course. And what is unique about my studio is that I offer a lot of different healing experiences and events. So I often collaborate with a lot of other instructors from the area to offer unique experiences, whether it is a special type of yoga practice with a sound bath, or different meditation practices. I've had crystal experts come in, shamanic drum healing experiences, different sound healers come and collaborate with me. So it is very much a unique little sanctuary that I've created. It's a small space, and my offerings are very intimate. So many of my public classes incorporate sound healing within them. And I teach a variety of styles of yoga, from vinyasa to restorative yin, and a unique offering of Ayurvedic Hatha yoga, which is something that I brought to my studio after acquiring my Ayurvedic specialist training. Um, Through my yoga journey, I was also working on my recovery from anorexia and an eating disorder. So that's something that also makes my space unique, is that I do work with clients in group settings or one to one that are focused on restoring that mind body connection and their relationship to themselves and their bodies. Um, with that work, I also am a teacher for yoga for eating disorders, which is how I came into connection with you. So I'm so grateful for that. And Jennifer, the founder of Yoga for Eating Disorders, I have taken her mentorship program and have been a part of her mentorship circles for quite a few years now. And it is work that I really feel called to do, as that was my journey to this practice and to these wonderful healing modalities of yoga and Ayurveda. So it's kind of a lot of moving pieces, but I definitely feel that I am where I'm meant to be right now, and certainly serving out my dharma. So yeah.
That's amazing. I'm so glad that you gave Jennifer a shout out for connecting us. And what really, when I reached out to her and I said, I'm really looking to speak to a yoga teacher who knows about Ayurveda, but also is educated with eating disorders. And when she put your name forward, I was like, this is amazing. Now, we did do one episode that hasn't been released yet, but will be released soon, or released before ours goes out. I talked with Diane Finlayson about Ayurveda and how to get diet culture out of Ayurveda. So we've sort of covered that, but you haven't had a chance to listen to it yet.
Mhm.
But I guess my question to you is, well, first of all, how did Ayurveda and or yoga really help you with your recovery?
Yeah. So I came to yoga in a very similar way to many people, which I suppose was through the physical attraction towards it. I grew up as a very athletic individual, and I was a varsity cheerleader for quite some time. And I really started to struggle with my eating disorder more um, outwardly. Um, I guess you could say I struggled from for a long time. As many of us, this is something that is, you know, it doesn't really have to do anything with food. It's something deeper. And so as I look back on my life, I can certainly see this starting for me at a very young age, but perhaps not coming to surface when I had that independence of being in university, living on my own, and dealing with some of those larger stressors in life. So I was a very dedicated student athlete, and my aunt had gifted me with an introductory pass to a yoga studio. And at that time, I was really struggling, but not necessarily aware or in acceptance of the fact that I was struggling. And because I was a dancer and a cheerleader, yoga was something that really appealed to me. I felt confident in a yoga class. I felt, that it fueled my ego, for a lack of a better explanation, for quite some time. Um, and I brought with me very much of that athletic perfectionist mentality to my yoga practice. And as I continued to struggle, and my body continued to weaken, it wasn't so much the physical aspects of yoga that kept me coming back to the practices. It started to really feel like a safe space for me. And some of the messages and words that the teachers would share started to speak to me in a different way, because they were literally things that I have never said to myself before, considered for myself before, like that I'm, worthy of rest or deserving of listening to my body, and that, you know, I am not going to feel the same on my mat every day, and that's okay. And these concepts were very foreign to me, and very um, comforting in a time where I was being so hard on myself. And even if I couldn't believe these things for myself, it felt really good to hear these things. And so slowly, I began to lose a lot of the things around me. I suffered a lot of physical disabilities as my body began to deteriorate. One of them being a foot drop in my foot. So I wasn't able to lift my toes due to a lot of follicular muscle loss. And so, as the captain of my cheerleading team in my last competition, I barely got to compete. I went from somebody who was, tumbling some pretty crazy tumbling passes to, barely being able to walk across the floor. And it was quite the quick decline once my body decided that it couldn't carry on for me anymore. Things started to move downhill very quickly. And I did end up in the hospital with a emergency type medical situation. I had some scar tissue wrapped around my bowel, and my bowel was almost swollen shut. So I got very, very sick and had to go into the hospital and have this emergency procedure, which I probably would have been able to detect a lot earlier had I been treating my body with the proper care and nourishment that it needed. But that was really a rock bottom point for me, because I went from a couple of months ago being this, athlete, thinking that I could continue trucking along in this way, to, losing all ability to basically move, and ending up in that hospital bed with a really scary, scary situation that I could have never foreseen for myself. Um, and so it was at that time that really everything changed for me. I really missed yoga, but it wasn't because I thought that I could go in there and challenge myself anymore. It was because I just wanted to be able to move, and I wanted to be able to be on my mat again. And I missed the community, and I missed the teacher's messages, and that permission to care for myself in that way and to hold myself in that way. And so, when I was finally able to return to my yoga practice, um, I remember it being the best practice of my entire life. And I could only, I couldn't do much at all. I was just grateful to be there and confident enough that I wasn't going to poop my pants during the practice. Um, so all I can remember is gratitude for everything I did, being able to lift my arm, gratitude, because I didn't know if I was going to be able to do that again. Gratitude for every time I was able to stretch my stomach, because I had 20 staples in it at one point. And when I left the practice, I was in tears. And I had said to the teacher, that was the best practice ever. And he said, "Oh, you always say that." And I said, "No, seriously." And he didn't understand, but it was because I finally let go of that expectation that I had for myself. And I finally let go of the pressure and the perfectionist attitude and the pushing and the going deeper or going harder, or, you know, staying just a little bit longer. I All of that was replaced with gratitude for just being in a body that could move. And I almost felt like this sadness of like regret inside of me, or realizing, this is how this could have been the entire time. That this is what yoga is, and this is how it heals. And after that, it really became, my mission to be able to offer this experience to somebody else, because I was practicing yoga, but now I was practicing yoga. And it was so profound that after that, I was on a few wait lists to be in inpatient. As you might know, in Canada, um, there are a lot of great resources, and with the way our healthcare system is, um, you have to wait to get into a lot of these things. So I was on a wait list for quite some time, and after this experience and recovering from surgery, I started to look into teacher training. And I booked a teacher training without telling my parents, which was not a great idea. But I knew that if I told anybody, they would try to change my mind, or think I wasn't ready, or thought I wasn't capable or something like that. So it became my motivation to um, at least recover from this surgery and find the strength to be able to go and learn. Because I just knew that there was so much more to this practice in store for me. And so I went to my 200-hour training, and it was extremely powerful and healing. And I certainly took a bit of a risk going in the state that I was, but I just knew that it was what I needed. And so, of course, medically, I was strong enough to go, and the doctor said, that it was safe for me to go. But it was definitely a challenge for me to, immerse myself in a group of strangers. I traveled to Costa Rica, and was, expected to nourish myself 3 times a day with these new people in this group so that I could be strong enough to do the training. And I remember signing a contract saying that I was going to do that for myself, and I did it. And after that, it became my mission to be able to offer people this experience. So I came home and I continued to work with my recovery team after my 200-hour training. And from then on, it just became about learning. At that point, we were heading towards the pandemic. And I immersed myself in a meditation training online. I immersed myself in a mindfulness training online. And I eventually took my 300-hour training towards the middle of the pandemic. Um, After that, I was yet reintroduced to Ayurveda. So that was the first introduction, as many of us do. We get a nice introduction to Ayurveda in our 200-hour teacher training. And in my 200-hour, it really opened my eyes. I remember not wanting to fill out my dosha quiz because I felt sad about how much, my body has changed. I remember taking the quiz and thinking, well, what I'm going to write on this paper isn't me, because, I've allowed this version of me to deteriorate so much that, who am I anymore? And are these answers even going to represent the real me? And through that process, I realized that it pretty much spelled out for me in such a beautiful way, what was going on. And by looking at my prakriti compared to my vikriti, where I am now versus my original born constitution, it almost like told a beautiful story of my life. And it was very touching. And at that time, um, I knew that Ayurveda had something in store for me. But of course, learning all of the yoga in your 200-hour training is a lot at once. So in my 300-hour training, I was much healthier, or much stronger, I should say, at this time. And I had been struggling with some irritable bowel and digestive issues as a result, most likely, of the years I spent with an eating disorder. So I still very much to this day struggle with irritable bowel syndrome and some digestive issues. So during my 300 hour, this was, something that was really going on for me. And when I was reintroduced to Ayurveda in my 300 hour, I yet again saw the potential that it had to help me heal my digestion, to help me heal my relationship with food, and to help me continue to heal the relationship with my body. So after that, I decided to pursue more training in Ayurveda. I was, in the pandemic, living by myself, teaching, some yoga online, working with different groups online. This was a time where we were like very locked down, especially in Canada. And I started to take webinars and things like that were being offered in abundance at the time. And I took a webinar with a woman, Serena Aurora, and I remember just watching her and thinking, I have to train with this woman. I must train with her. And so I looked up her training, and this is about a year ago now. I went to Costa Rica in November and acquired an Ayurvedic specialist training at Peace Retreat with Serena Aurora and Kevin McQuillan. And I was there for about a week. It was a very, very profound experience and the deep dive into Ayurveda that I was really looking for. And one of the things that I was really struggling with or grappling with at this time was how difficult it is to struggle with digestion and celebrate food freedom in eating disorder recovery. It's a very challenging thing, and this training was really the missing piece to a lot of those questions, and provided me a lot of validation in my journey. And I would say that what made this also transformational and also helpful, to summarize all of that babbling, is that Ayurveda reminded me that we are nature. Down to its very core, I was reminded that I am no different than all of these other moving parts around me in nature, and we all come from the same hand. So, who am I to think that I can outsmart nature? And this provided me with a lot of peace. Because rather than it being so complicated as navigating digestion and nutrition can feel, it all became quite simple. And I realized that we are the ones that make it so complicated. Diet culture is the one that makes it so complicated. And it gave me permission to be simple again and to listen to myself as the most important source of information about what I should decide to do in regards to my body and my health and my own nutrition. So Ayurveda gave me a lot of agency, and it transformed the way that I view nourishment and my body altogether. Because rather than just seeing food as an exchange of, energy or calories or fuel, I really did understand how it was medicine and how nourishment was providing me with so much more than a strong body. In fact, that was just a very minimal part of what it was providing me with. And by learning Ayurveda, I understood that every everything has a root cause, and that when we look to that root cause, there is so much more that can be done rather than just putting a band-aid on top. Um, for example, um, it helped me to realize that my health is a lot more than just what I put into my body. It's also what I choose to consume on social media. It's also how much I say yes to in my day. It's also the thoughts that I am thinking that my body is experiencing and witnessing. And it allowed me to view health as a much more holistic approach rather than just what I'm putting into my body and how that's going to affect me. Um, and so when you realize that nourishment is so much more than calories, and what a disgrace it is to think that that's all it is, um, it really allowed me to honor my body in a completely and a new way. And the uniqueness of Ayurveda by looking at the doshas and by looking at um, how everybody is extremely unique based on their own doshic makeup or their prakriti, or where they are now. It gives you that permission to say what works for you probably isn't going to work for me. And so I don't have to compare myself to you. And what you are demonstrating, whether it's somebody on social media or a friend who thinks they know everything about nutrition or whatever, it gives you that permission to say, you know what, maybe that works for that person, but it doesn't have to work for me. Whereas I feel diet culture makes us think that all of our bodies are going to react to certain things in the same way. And that if, you try the new fad diet and it's not working for you, somehow you've failed or you're not doing it right or, something like that. And so the ability to celebrate myself as a unique individual and, have permission to tell other people that's great that that works for you, but it's not going to work for me is so empowering, especially when there are an abundance of people out there offering their opinion about nutrition.
So true. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing this. And thank you for sharing, like, in detail your story. Connected Yoga Teachers, I wanted to pop in here quickly to tell you about a 5-day website bootcamp that's being hosted by my very good friend Mado. You might know her from the Yoga Teacher Resource podcast and also by OfferingTree. It begins soon if you're listening in real time, November 6th, 2023. If you've ever wanted to create a website or if you have a website that needs a good refresh, check out this workshop. We'll make sure to link to it in the show notes. Otherwise, you can head over to OfferingTree.com and look for it on their website. And if you are thinking, okay, I'm going to use OfferingTree to make a website, make sure to use our podcast listener discount code. That's over at OfferingTree.com/Shannon. Alrighty, let's get back into today's episode with Abbey. A couple of things were coming to mind here. As you were talking, I was thinking, and I'm not asking this question with any judgment. I think I know the answer to it, and I want to highlight it for our listeners. So my question is, did any of your yoga teachers know that you were dealing with an eating disorder as you were going to class? Or did the teachers at the yoga teacher training, did they know?
So prior to going to yoga training, I would say that there was a long time of practicing yoga where perhaps a lot of people around me had a very good idea of what was going on, but were waiting for maybe me to say something or to acknowledge that I had accepted this. So there were a few people quietly addressing it with me. But in a larger scheme of things, in terms of class and things like that, not really. Before COVID, I mean, I was in one of those rooms where we'd pack like 50 people in there, and it's really tight, and people's feet are in your face, and all that kind of stuff. Um, so I would say at that time, not really. But when I went away to training, it was something that I addressed right away, as naturally many of us coming to yoga training, and all of us all over the world, are struggling with something, or we have something to bring to the table that has guided us down this journey, or to take this path. And I would say that opening up about my eating disorder in teacher training was the best thing I could have ever done. Because even if there weren't folks directly dealing with the same thing as me in that moment, they were dealing with something that was also quite painful, or they have dealt with something similar to me. And it is incredible how the universe works, because when I had gone to my first teacher training, I was the first time I've ever traveled by myself, or got on a plane by myself. And when I got off the plane, I wasn't even really sure how to find like my shuttle, or my group, or anything like that. And I just found another girl with a yoga mat, and we started talking, and she was a part of my training. And before I had even told her any part of my story, she said, "Yeah, I work at an eating disorder outpatient facility." And so it was very synchronistic. I also became very good friends with another student on the training, who was a dietitian, and also working in an eating disorder treatment facility. So I had really had a lot of almonds or signs with me, which was really cool, that I was kind of in the right place, and that I was ultimately held and safe. So I am very grateful for that, and um, truly believe that, you know, everything happens for a reason, and that the universe will show you those signs when you're on the right path.
It's amazing. The reason why I wanted to highlight that is because many of our listeners are yoga teachers, and I'm guessing that there are lots of students coming to our classes. We've talked about this on the podcast in different episodes, who are dealing with an eating disorder, or like you said, something else that is coming up in their life. Not necessarily that they're talking about that thing, they're coming to class, but it's important for us as yoga teachers to understand and to have that education. That's why I'm really excited that you're doing this work, Jennifer's doing this work. Um, were there times when you were attending yoga as a student, looking back now with the education that you have and the recovery that you've done, or when you were studying as a yoga teacher? So when you were practicing yoga or studying as a teacher, or even now, are there times where you're like, gosh, this piece right here needs to be like talked about more, or taken out of yoga because it's actually causing more harm for someone who's in recovery?
Hmm. Hmm. Certainly. And it's tough, because even as, a teacher who considers themselves to be very trauma informed, and teaches from the lens of yoga for eating disorders, um, it's still hard to think, have I triggered somebody? Have I said something that, you know, has made somebody feel a certain type of way, or unsafe? And at the end of the day, there is no way to know, or to protect ourselves from never triggering anybody at all, in some type of way. You know what I mean? Like, a trigger could really be almost anything for us. Um, and and that can feel like a lot of pressure as a teacher. Oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing. What if I say the color blue, and this person's, you know ex significant other drove a blue truck, like we could think of endless scenarios that could trigger somebody, and we can really freak ourselves out in that way of like, wow, I don't know if I should say anything at all. But there are certainly a few things that, looking back, um, influence the way that I teach now because of my own experience, if that makes sense. And I certainly think that um, something that I pride myself on in my classes, and um, maybe some people don't like it, maybe some people do. It doesn't really matter to me, but I'm very inclusive and invitational. Um, and this goes to the idea of yoga being a practice and not a performance. And constantly giving my students that permission to not do it, or to do something different, or to say no, whether that's just lying in shavasana if they need a break, or not doing a round of vinyasa, or whether that's choosing a different posture, using props, taking a lot longer to finish like whatever they're doing. I often say, option for this. Maybe you'd like to do this if it feels good when you are ready. Inviting people to make the practice their own, to me, is really important. Um, One of the things that I was tasked with while I was practicing yoga and going through therapy was to purposely not do a pose in a class. And this was the hardest thing that I've ever done. And it was like, wow, like you really can't allow yourself to just not do this warrior two pose. It was like the most uncomfortable thing. And it took me months to do it. And thinking about that, and, how difficult that was for me, I want to offer people that permission so that they don't feel like they have to be like in tip top shape to attend my yoga class. I want it to be the place that they come to because they aren't feeling tip top, and they know that they're allowed to not feel tip top and still come to practice and have a practice. And whatever that practice looks like is awesome. Because if we only show up on our mats when we're feeling like 1,000,000%, then how is yoga supposed to help us through life? You know, because it's the times that we come to our mat not feeling our best, and we practice anyways and realize that that was enough, or that we're able to just give ourselves what we need that day on our mat. And it doesn't have to be better than all the other times we've come to our mat. And I think, as a person who, grew up as an athlete and took that mindset to their to movement in their life in general, we forget that we're doing this for our well-being, not to, you know, like win some type of award. Like, I don't know, like what are we competing for? You know what I mean? And we're so tough on ourselves when really this is something that is supposed to be conducive to our well-being. And I think that, especially in the West, exercise is often something that is not conducive to our well-being, but we know that it's good for us. So the messages are getting very, very mixed and very confused, because yes, movement is fantastic for our mental well-being. But when it becomes a chore or something that you have to do to get on with your day, or to feel like you're worthy of something, then that is not conducive to our mental well-being. But diet culture puts that pressure on us and turns it into, you must constantly be improving, or you must constantly be getting stronger, or more this, or what's the point? And so I think that that's something that I really take to my teaching, is reminding people that, there might be a lot of moments in your day where you feel like you have to show up, and this isn't one of them. This is the one where you get to be held. And if it's a practice where you feel you're tip top and you're going to push yourself, that's great. But that's not the requirement. Um, and getting that through to my students has been a really beautiful journey for me, because, I get to give them that permission to like zip off their human suit and just be for a while, and realize like, I don't have to show up looking like some sort of fitness model to go to yoga class. I don't have to, do every pose, or I'm not expected to get everything right. And so I often remind my students that if you would like to take a break and lie on your mat, I would be really proud of you. And by changing that perspective, I think it just helps people honor that permission and actually take it, um, because they feel that they're allowed to. So I think that's something that is big for me. And
That's amazing. I love how you're holding that space for your students and saying, like, you don't have to show up. You can just be supported and be held here in this space.
Mhm.
I also noticed on your website that you're doing like an offering yoga for eating disorders, everything yoga without the mat. So there's
Mhm.
no movement on a yoga mat. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So this is a program that I taught last year for the first time with Yoga for Eating Disorders, and it went so wonderfully that we're going to bring it back again this year. So it starts in February, and I am so excited about it. And yes, it is a program designed with the intention that movement isn't always so comfortable when we're struggling with an eating disorder. There can be a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety, and it might not feel the safest for us to engage in movement practices at certain parts of our journey in recovery. And that is okay. And I think one of the most healing things for me was going to yoga training and realizing that asana, or the actual movement part of yoga, is just one small aspect of the practice. And that it's us in the West who decided that the movement part is the sexiest part of yoga. And so we're going to exploit that. And the rest of it is just kind of like lingering in the background. And the teachers talk about it, and maybe a few of us like pick up on it if we're lucky, but nobody really talks about it unless you decide to go to teacher training and immerse yourself in it, or ask your teacher for a book, or ask your teacher to go for coffee and talk about the yamas and niyamas. But otherwise, it's not so much in our face as all the yoga influencers, doing all of the crazy postures and flows to make your body look this way and that way. Um, it's we've really like lost sight a little bit in the West of what yoga means, and so then there are us people who have really embraced this practice as a beautiful model to recovery from many things, whether it's eating disorders or anxiety or depression or mood disorders, PTSD, all sorts of things. And from the outside, people are looking and going, okay, so I have to, do this fancy yoga practice, and this is supposed to somehow help me with my eating disorder. And actually, that sounds awful. Like I don't want to be standing on my mat and trying all those poses. Like that looks terrifying. Um, and so through speaking with many of my students from the other programs I had run with yoga for eating disorders in the past, many of them had shared this with me. I don't feel comfortable going into a yoga studio. I don't feel comfortable doing the movement. And so I want yoga to be a part of my recovery. And I hear how it's so beautiful, but I don't want to move like that. And it doesn't feel safe for me right now. And so that's when I was like, okay, like, what if we just take movement out of the equation? And by doing that, really make a statement that, like, this is only one piece. And let's like go through this whole yoga journey together without this one piece and realize that there's so much more to it. So, what we do is we look at the 8 limbs of yoga and we look at asana just being one of those limbs. And so, without asana, we use the other limbs of yoga. And each week we go through a different yama or niyama from the 8 limbs of yoga. So the first limb of yoga are the yamas and niyamas, and they are the moral and ethical guidelines to living in tune with oneness or with source or whoever your higher power might be. So by going through each of these yamas and niyamas, we use the 8 limbs of yoga to help us understand them. So each week um, we talk about 2 yamas or niyamas until we go through the entire list. And each week will include a little discussion about the yoga philosophy concept of the yama or niyama. Then we usually do a mindfulness practice. And coincidentally, the mindfulness practice derives from the 8 limbs of yoga. So we might be looking at pratyahara, single pointed awareness, or we might be looking at meditation, or we might be looking at what it means to focus on one single point. Or we might be practicing svadhyaya, journaling, and self reflection. So, depending on what yama or niyama, what theme we're talking about, we'll have some sort of practice that doesn't involve movement. So, we might look at mudras. We've done different journaling and reflection exercises, different mindfulness activities, or different styles of meditation. We use art and do different expressions of our feelings and emotions through drawing and colors. And we explore the 8 limbs of yoga without movement at all. And the journey that we go on together is so profound. And there's always an end. There's always discussion at the end that we're able to talk about, our experience with the practice. And it's all online. So some of us might have cameras on, some of us might have cameras off. So it's time for us to, reflect and relate and ask more questions about the themes. And throughout the program, they all have a little booklet designed by me where there are continuing practices for each theme that take us through the week. So whether it's another journal reflection or another mindfulness practice that they can do on their own, like a walking meditation in nature, something like that. And it's really, really empowering for us to explore yoga without the movement and make the practice part of our recovery while it's still feeling safe and comfortable and inviting. And it really debunks a lot of the myths that we think about yoga. And I think that's my favorite part. Like, I feel like a rebel almost when I teach this course, because we are just so in the yogic practices and we're so not doing it the way everyone else is doing it, And the students ultimately end up feeling so empowered because they are so knowledgeable now about yoga and about the 8 limbs, and they have the independence to know that they are very much immersed in these yoga practices without having to go to the studio and, sit in a vinyasa class that they really don't want to be in or don't feel ready for. Um, and it gives them that permission to invite yoga into their recovery in a way that feels safe for them. Um, and of course, there are movement practices and asana practices that can be very helpful for recovery if that's what you feel you're ready for at that time. Um, and I think that it gives us permission to realize that everyone's recovery is very different. And yoga in your recovery can also look very different as well, depending on what you're ready for and what resonates with you.
I hope our connected yoga teacher listeners, no matter what, really take that as an idea if it feels appealing to them to teach yoga possibly without any movement. I think that's really cool.
Hmm.
Um, what other what other things would you tell yoga teachers if they're looking at, okay, maybe they are like wondering about their own um, relationship to their body and to food. Maybe they have some questions about that, or maybe they're supporting yoga students who have that, which I think is literally in every class we're teaching. Where would you suggest that they learn some more so that they have the education needed?
Hmm. Um, well, I certainly love learning from Jennifer. So, Yoga for Eating Disorders. They have an Instagram, and Jennifer also has a beautiful website. On the Yoga for Eating Disorders website, there is a virtual library of free resources for folks that are struggling with an eating disorder, but all of the practices are taught by teachers who have been a part of Jennifer's Yoga for Eating Disorders mentorship program. So there are a variety of recorded practices, some movement practices, some are meditation practices, and they're not super long. You can find some shorter ones in there as well. And I think it's helpful to just take some of these classes and pay attention to the way that the cues are being delivered and maybe even the themes of these small practices, and how the teachers are approaching some of the postures. And, in that, they'll find a lot of that inclusive language. They'll find a lot of cues that are a bit more atomical, rather than cueing different parts of the body. They may notice a lot more cueing of one's own like inner anatomy instead. So, for example, um, when I was as and still to this day, it's not like I always share with my students, the eating disorder for me is an ongoing journey. I consider myself um, on the other side of recovery, and very proud of myself for the journey that I've been on. But as I struggle with digestion and mentioned before, it is hard to celebrate sometimes food freedom when you struggle with digestive problems and are still navigating through that. So um, as much as I have a much higher perspective of my journey now, I still I still get triggered when I go to classes and stuff, and that's part of life. And something that was difficult for me was a cue that would be like squeeze your thighs together or something like that. And it sounds, that might sound like silly to some teachers, like, why would that, what else am I supposed to say? You know what I mean? But it could be as simple as changing that to, engage your quadriceps rather than, you know, squeeze your thighs together, or something like that. Or another one like suck in your belly. Maybe engage the core is a little bit better, And if somebody is very hypersensitive about their body, sure, that could still cause them to, bring their awareness to their stomach in an unfavorable way. But the words engage your core, to me, speak a lot more to the inner workings of the body rather than the physical appearance of suck in your belly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
So there are just like small things like that when you think about them in a logical way, it's kind of like, oh, like, is that really much of a difference? But when you hear them and feel them in your practice, you feel how they're different and you feel how they're a little bit softer, and it draws the awareness to the experience of the inner body rather than the external body. Like, oh God, yeah, I gotta suck my tummy in, whereas it's like, okay, like engage my core. My core is my stabilizer, you need a core to stand up. So it just brings a different feeling to the cue when you're able to speak to the inner workings of the body rather than the physical appearance of the outer body.
So good. I'll include a link to your website as well as the Yoga for Eating Disorders with Jennifer. And I just want to say that I'm so grateful for you sharing your story with this, and also how you found a lot of help through Ayurveda and yoga, and now how you're taking that into the world and helping others. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure to be able to come on here and share. I could talk about this forever. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about something that isn't talked about in such detail all the time. Or perhaps there are a lot of things in here that people are curious of and would love to know, but don't necessarily want to ask or know where to ask. So thank you very much for providing me this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Abbey, for really sharing your journey. I think what lands information so well is someone's personal story. And I love that you have taken this personal story, the struggles that you have faced in your life, and made it into something that helps other people who are facing the same thing or similar things. I think it's a beautiful way to share yoga. I see it happen over and over again with yoga teachers. They sort of pick that specialty or that niche based out of how yoga helped them through something. Again, connected yoga teachers, I would say if this was sort of new to you and you've never learned about disordered eating or eating disorders, we have a nice library of episodes because, as I said in the intro, this is close to my heart. I've seen how this can really impact individuals. And I know that we can all do better collectively as someone who sits in the health and wellness industry and, talks to a lot of people about movement and how their bodies are working. I think that there's a lot that we need to know so that we're making sure that we're not doing harm. So I'll link to those in the show notes. That's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/348. And before we say goodbye, I wanted to tell you how we can hang out in real time. So we are just wrapping up a 7-week series with Sarah Garden, Yoga for Endometriosis and Pelvic Pain. It's been amazing. It's so good. If you're wanting to get the replay for those classes, you can head on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com, click on yoga, and there's a drop down there and you can see all of our yoga series. Also, you can join Pelvic Health Professionals and you'll get access to all of that and our calls. We just had a great call this month about diastasis recti. I learned some really new information. So exciting. In November, we're talking about stress in the nervous system and how it impacts the pelvic floor. December, we're talking about pelvic health and cancer with Tyla. And exciting news, because I talked about this last week on the podcast, we are putting a yoga series together with Tyla that's focused on pelvic cancer and yoga, a yoga series for people who are dealing with pelvic cancer. So I'll let you know as soon as we have dates set. Then in January, we're going to talk about how the feet are connected with the pelvic floor. And so we just have a lot going on in there. It's a membership where you can pay monthly. You can cancel your membership anytime. Head on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com to join us and to check that out. Thank you so much to our amazing team over here, Suzanne Crunch and Sinead, for all the work you do in this world. And also thank you, dear listener. This podcast exists because you're here listening, and it means so much that you're here listening right until the end. I'd love to know, what are you doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?